Hello everyone, welcome to this seminar session from the Mobile People Leverhulme Doctoral Scholarship Program at Queen Mary, University of London. I am Manuela and I'm a second-year Leverhulme doctoral student researching deportation policies.
And I'm Benedetta, and I'm also a second-year Leverhulme doctoral student researching the colonial connections and mobilities in the Balkans. And we're delighted to have here today Professor Mignolo. So Professor Walter Mignolo is a William H. Wanamaker Distinguished Professor of Roman Studies at Duke University in the United States, and one of the founding scholars of the Modernity, Coloniality, Decoloniality Collective. He has published extensively on the constitution and transformation of the modern colonial world since 1500, exposing modernity coloniality as the embedded structure of the colonial matrix of power.
His political and intellectual contribution expands across and beyond disciplines, and he is an advocate of decoloniality, a movement for delinking from Eurocentric and westernized ways of knowing, being, and doing. Throughout his career, he has received many awards and accolades, including the Catherine Singer Kovacs Prize for the Darker Side of the Renaissance in 1996 and the Frantz Fanon Prize by the Caribbean Philosophical Association for the Idea of Latin America in 2006. Recently, Professor Mignolo co-authored On Decoloniality with Professor Catherine Walsh. This is the first of a book series to give voice to decolonial practices across the globe. This year, Professor Mignolo is publishing The Politics of Decolonial Investigations. We are beyond excited to welcome Professor Mignolo to this conversation series, and we hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did.
So to begin our conversation, we wanted to let you the opportunity to give us a little bit of background on the political meaning of your work and your commitment as the colonial scholar. So we know that the modernity, coloniality, decoloniality emerges as an antidisciplinary and politicized movement. And as you mentioned in your latest book, it did not come out of any specific disciplinary or interdisciplinary debate, but from lived experiences. So decoloniality is not a matter of updating or improving a discipline, but it's embedded in practice of living and liberation concerns. So reading on this, can you walk us through your encounter with decoloniality and how your work evolved within the movement?
Okay. I like those kind of genealogical questions, and I always insist on that and kind of provoke my students to think about why are you doing what you are doing, and when do you get into that? So when I am asking that question, I'm really pleased because it kind of. But before going into detail, I want to just make a kind of comment, very important comment, on your introduction to question one, which is the modernity, coloniality, decoloniality emerged as an antidisciplinary. No, and this is very important. It's not antidisciplinary, it's indisciplinary. Non-disciplinary. Why? And this is very important. It's not that I'm not correcting an error. I mean, that's very easy to kind of, there are so many small details in the colonial thinking that needs you to pay attention, because all of us have been schooled and programmed by modernity. So it's very easy when somebody kind of contests something that say that is anti. And that's true, it's a lot of. And why not anti? Because if you are anti whatever, I mean, the discipline, the system, whatever you are, religion, you maintain the priority, you keep it in touch, and you are against. But the rule of the game has been already fixed. So you will always lose. And that is the problem of socialism, for example. Marxist socialism is a great critique of capitalism, especially Marx. But the question of trying to create a socialist state is a losing proposition, because the nation state has been already created by liberal capitalism. So if you create a socialist state, well, now we are talking about that it failed, right? And it failed because it was anti, but keeps the rule of the game. That today is a huge kind of geopolitical problem. But so the question is, that's why we talk about, not about resistance, which is anti, but re-existence. To relinquish the link and begin to kind of build our own way of living. That's another big issue. We are all into the kind of the state system and the interstate system. We intellectual, scholar, artists, whatever kind of in the field we work, being in a university or not, journalists, all this kind of the sphere of the intellectual field we don't have much saying into, let's say, Davos or the White House or the International Monetary Fund and the $1 trillion that flows every day from London market to Frankfurt to Shanghai to New York. So the most important thing here is to be aware of our potential, but also about our limits. Not to believe that because we like the idea of decoloniality, now this is the thing. We have to kind of convert everybody to decoloniality, and so we will change things. Well, if we think like that, we become a missionary. That's what the Christian missionaries started to do since the 16th century. Or we become Marxist, and that's it. I mean, the opposition, because the liberals and neoliberal now, yes, but they don't have too much people to convince. It's what they are doing is to convince people. So the power of capitalism has been to create and managing desire, which is the desire to have it more, to success, to the first top of the line, and all these kind of things. So the question is, what kind of desire are we going to create? And that is the big challenge. A cousin of mine in the 90s, and he was a Marxist, but he was a small but successful business guy, and he still is. But he studied, business administration. So he was a thoughtful guy, and is a thoughtful guy, and he knew Marx and Marxist very well. And he told me one day, and he said, because he knew I was a colonial and he was kind of capitalist, and said, if you people can create a desire that is stronger than the desire that capitalism created, you are in business. So what is that desire? That is a big job, but it's happening. It's the desire for life, for living, not for killing and destroying. Is the desire for love, in the sense of, not the romantic love, that can have its place too, but the kind of the respect and the listening, and the respect as a people, but also listening to nature, right? So that is in the horizon, and it's a lot of awakening the planet. So decoloniality is a contribution to something that is going on. And we will talk more about what is going on. So I talked too much and I didn't answer your question yet. So how I get into that? A long story to make it very short. I was born and educated in Argentina. I went to the university in Argentina in the 60s. And Gramsci was a big name because the young generation of Marxists at that time, that were, I mean, young professors, I mean, they were in the 35, 45, and I was a student, and I was a 20, I don't know, 22, 23, or whatever. And they created Pasado y Presente, which is a kind of sister of past and present in London, kind of the cultural studies, etc. But there was no connection there. It was just kind of Gramsci in Argentina and Gramsci in London. And past and present was, and that was a generation that was kind of cut, taking the kind of the cut with the PC, the Communist Party. So that was the kind of break. Also in Argentina and London was a kind of the breakup generation. So Gramsci was the kind of path that illuminated the road. So, so that was something that we were doing outside of class. That was a kind of, you know, kind of reading Marx, reading Gramsci, and doing things, I mean, whatever politically at that point. I mean, I was involved in cinema and cinema club and all this kind of thing. But I was interested in semiotics. So when the time came, there was a fellowship to study abroad at the university, and I applied to study semiotics in either Italy with Eco or in Paris with Barth. Both responded. Eco a long letter, Barth a short letter, but I decided to go to Paris instead of Bologna, but that's when I want to go now. I mean, in the fall, I want to go to Bologna and stay there. So I was self-colonized. I mean, I thought that the French and the European have the right ideas, and semiotic was one great possibility of thinking. I was connected to philosophy because I went to Cordoba also to study philosophy. So I went and did my PhD in semiotics. It was a kind of discourse analysis, literary theory and semiotics. That was a kind of the sphere of. But there was something there that kind of bothered me in the kind of the personal aspect that at that time, people coming from Latin America were called sudacas. So sudacas were the kind of immigrant. What are they doing here? No? So in Spain and France mainly, I mean, because they have a lot of connection with Spain. But that made me realize that I had the same kind of discomfort in Argentina. Because I remember a conversation with a friend who was, we call it cabecitas negras because he was from the north. I mean, he was brown and dark and black hair, but from the north. And one day he asked me, Walter, do you feel Argentinian? And that kind of waked me up because I said, no. And then we started talking why. And he didn't feel Argentina because he's from the north, and people from the north were kind of seen from Buenos Aires as cabecitas negras, the people who went to Buenos Aires during Perón and kind of supported Perón. And I didn't feel Argentinian because I was son of immigrant and the country belonged to other people. The country belonged to the people who had the land since the 18th century in Argentina, and belongs to the British and the German, whom in the 19th century, because of the railroad, they acquired more land, the good land. So the country belonged to them. And then I was in France again with the same feeling. But I finished the dissertation. And I find a job in the United States. When I came to the United States, again, I became a Hispanic at that time. Now it's a Latino, right? So that began to change because of the discovery. I didn't know that they existed, but I got there in 75. The Latinos and Latinas. That was a wake-up call. So that kind of began to change my sensing and my emotion and my thinking. And that is why I began to kind of go back to understand the colonial period. Because I began to realize that the Latinos, Latinas in the United States cannot be understood at that time without the history of the Americas and the history of the colonization. Colonization and then liberation and then Mexico and then United States stealing land from Mexico, so moving the border to the south and now saying that they are crossing the border, right? So by early 80s, I already published my 2 articles on colonial issues. I mean, there wasn't more in historiography, but I want to just understand what was the difference between historiography of the New World and historiography in the Renaissance. But historiography in the Renaissance took me back to the Roman and the Cicero, and then to Herodotus, etc. No, so I did that, and I began to kind of understand the kind of the break that then I call colonial difference between European concept of historiography in the Renaissance and what happened with that historiography is kind of projected to talk about other places. So that question said, well, what was the Aztec and the Incas thinking about these people telling them who they were? So that began the trajectory to the darker side of the Renaissance. But in the middle, something very important happened. In 1986, Ngugi wa Thiong'o published Decolonizing the Mind. And that was a big impact, not in the mainstream of Anglo intelligence, but was a great impact for people who didn't belong to the mainstream. And I was used to that. What happened to me in Argentina happened to me in Brazil. That's my place. That is the borderland, right? That you are, but you don't belong. Right? No, I mean, they treat me well. Nobody was kind of like, I have a good job, and but there is that kind of feeling, no? So I was, Rolena Adorno was at Michigan. We were both at Michigan at that time. And in 86, also Rolena published his groundbreaking book on Guamán Poma de Ayala. Guamán Poma, Writing and Resistance in Colonial Peru. And that began my kind of thinking, well, he was not resisting, he was doing something else. So then I wrote about this, but at that time was not clear. The only clear is that, no, he's doing something more than resistance. Yes, he's resisting, but no, he was making a fantastic proposal. Whether that work or not, but it's working now. Right? So, and then the third was Gloria Anzaldúa in 1987, published Borderland La Frontera. And that's it. That was the first impact. That was the first kind of, yeah, Anzaldúa was very, I mean, the impact was wide, and especially the kind of the women of color, and especially the lesbian women of color, and then gay of color, right? And I mean, I was white and I was heterosexual, but then people say, why are you interested in Ansaldúa? Well, because Ansaldúa said two things that for me, and until today, they are well and alive. The first is the borderland, more or less, is at 20,000 miles of, I don't remember, of border or something like that. And the important part is this: a line, a border in which the first world greets with the third and bleed. And that's the colonial wound. And then the other point that Ansaldúa made is la facultad. What is la facultad? La facultad is that kind of sensing, knowing by sensing. It's a kind of sixth sense. So she kind of elaborated on la facultad. It's a kind of intuition, it's not rational. Then you can rationalize. But then she said, the person who are more apt to kind of sense and enact la facultad, who are they? Are the wretches of the earth. I mean, the people of color, the gay and the lesbian. So, I mean, I am not wretched in that sense, but the colonial wound is a question of a scale. We are touched with a different kind of intensity. But so when I put together the kind of third world kind of agrees with the first and bleed and la facultad, I began to understand why I was sensing what I was sensing. I began to understand my emotion. And then I used the rationale to write the darker side of the Renaissance. And I played the game with a lot of quotation, with a lot of language, with a kind of, even, I mean, I played the game so well that was a very long review in the New York Review of Books. And I got an award. But that was a book, not a scholar, I mean, it was a scholarly book because I had to play the game. But as a friend of mine told me, she said, I like what you were writing when you were a semiotician. That was fine. But I like much more what you are writing now. And I said, why? Because you are writing with anger. And that is the point. Never lose your joy, but don't forget your anger. Because the system wants to be depressed, to be angry and resist, and to catch you. So the linking, those are two components, no? The linking is don't lose your joy and don't forget you're angry. And the last point, I was prepared. I was prepared when in 1994, something like that, by chance in Bogota or in Quito, I don't remember where. I went to the library and the bookstore. I saw a book in the news, new arrivals. There's a Los Conquistados. I said, well, since I was right in the darker side of the Renaissance, I got the book and went to a coffee, have a cup of coffee, and saw the last article, Quijano. I have heard his name because of dependency theory and all that, but I never read him. And I read that book, and coloniality was there. And when I saw coloniality, felt coloniality, that was an epiphany. Coloniality put everything I told you together. So since then, it's coloniality all the way down. That's the only thing I do. So one more thing. When Quijano introduced coloniality, was already a decolonial concept. It's not a sociological, it's not a disciplinary. He was a sociologist, but coloniality didn't come out of sociology as a discipline. Sociology came out of his activism and thinking dependency theory and all this kind of, and the global order, because coloniality is not just explaining South America. Coloniality is explaining what happened in the world since the 16th century. Well, I went a little bit longer, but we have a foundation here for the rest.
Yeah, and I think questions are popping out of our heads, and yeah, I just want to spend the entire day listening here. Professor Mignolo, I was wondering if we could take a few things you said, and especially when you touched upon borderlands, and then you also touched upon the third, the wretched of the world, clashing and bleeding, and bring those conceptualizations to what our program and what our colleagues and ourselves are trying to do. So we are an interdisciplinary group of scholars, and we try to broadly explore mobility as a way of life. But inevitably, our work then is always animated by identifying and naming and problematizing borders. And I wanted then to link this to your own work, where you highlight that borders are everywhere, and they are not only geographic. They are racial, sexual, epistemic, ontological, religious, aesthetic, linguistic, and so on. And so mobility has this hierarchical or racialized dimension, as you already mentioned now throughout your first answer, and one that cannot be disconnected from colonized histories, as you just also pointed out. So I guess our second question will go more or less around how does decoloniality then speak to the challenge of acknowledging silenced and neglected histories of mobile people, and to the purpose of dignifying mobile ways of being and knowing. And especially as you mentioned, the border from the United States and Mexico as an example, that first they put the border down, now the border is going up. So if you could expand a little bit on that.
Okay. I am kind of rereading the written version, redefining mobile ways of being and knowing. Well, another, I mentioned two key points there for kind of the colonial thinking for me. Other people have other kind of anchors. For me is always, whatever question you have, ask yourself, is that something that emerged in the 16th century or something that already existed, but in the 16th century changed the configuration and the experience of people and the narrative that people told about themselves or about the others, right? So migration, mobility, I mean, animals who can move, like including fish, animals that can move on earth, air, like birds or fish, they're always moving. They are never in the same place, right? And there is a lot of story there. So kind of start thinking about some basic biological foundation, I want to say, what our organisms can do. We are all kind of, all human beings, but I mean, all animals, our organism has some kind of organ to orient ourselves in space. If we don't have that organ, we kind of knock our nose in the next tree when I get out of the, and the bird the same, but the only thing that the bird get confused is with the windows. They see the reflection in the window, and boom. But that's so. Mobility is biologically a capacity of living organism. So that's very important. So the living organism that we call human or human species. Yeah, I don't know. At some point, I don't know how many. Somebody said 3 million years. Somebody, Homo sapiens is 400,000, etc., etc. But it has been always mobility on foot. On foot, and we have horses. I don't know when the horses came into being. So the question for us today is what happened to mobility since the 16th century? Who was moving from where to where? So in the Americas, from Canada, well, today Canada to Mapuches, they were kind of moving all the time. But all of a sudden, and some people say, well, that the Chinese were here or Viking. They may be, but they didn't stay. And they didn't make any kind of fuss. So it's not a kind of modern question who was here first. That is for modernity. It's not our concern. The people who come here came, as we know, through the ocean, non-invited and without passports, right? And they settled. And they settled and took over. And then they forced migration, captured people in Africa, and forced them to come here. So that was a kind of mobility, forced mobility of human beings. Huh? Now, the Africans are doing the same by themselves, risking their life in the Mediterranean. Well, think about the question of who is moving when, from where to where. So here we have two examples. The Africans who were forced in the 16th, 17th, up to 18th century, but mainly 16th, 17th century. And now the African, but not only the African, the Middle Eastern, the Latin American, who kind of moved to Europe and to United States. Why Latin American are moving here? Well, for the same reason, right? So who is moving where, when, under what condition? So mobility, mobility is a human kind of activity. But now I think that the conditions for mobility are very specific, and one is who moved from Europe to Africa and who moved from Africa to Europe, who moved from United States to South America and who moves. And so you will see that the people who move from the north to the south are fewer, but the capitals flows. So I have to think about not just the mobility of people, but all the attention that the mass media capture our attention to pay attention to people and poor people, etc. They are kind of hiding that capitals are flying in another direction. So that is one. If you want to redefine mobility, that is the question. That is a kind of a starting point to kind of relinquish the link from the current short conception of mobility and get into the condition of mobility. The question is not what is mobility, but what kind of prompted this kind of mobility to happen now. And that's the kind of question: who is moving from where to where and why? Okay? So that will be a general thing. Now the second point is that you are from Brazil, you are from Italy. Benedetta is still in Europe, even if it's from the south of Europe. That's important. The south of Europe is a very special kind of Europe since Kant and Hegel, right? They told the story, and the story keep on repeating to Kant and Hegel to the European Union, right? So why the Spaniard moved during the Cold War to Germany and to France, etc.? Well, because Spain was miserable. And they one day kind of move back because neoliberals made the Spanish kind of rich, and a lot of people kind of come back, and they began to kind of stop the immigration from the north. I mean, and in United States too. I mean, the United States is a country for mobile people. I mean, the immigrant and also the African force. So that's another thing. And the question is, you are from Brazil, so you moved Manuela from the third world to the first. And Benedetta moved from the south to the north. Whether that is good or bad, I don't know, but that is why you are in London, and not too many London people are in Italy or in Brazil. If they go to Italy, they London because of the sun, because of the beaches, because of Sicilia, I don't know, things like that. So that is a very important question. So the question is mobility for our kind of people. I mean, we are not refugees. We didn't move. You didn't move to London because terrible condition in your countries. I didn't move to France because terrible, it was a dictatorship. But a lot of people were kind of forced to leave, otherwise they would kill them. I was not in that case, when I just lived, as I said, because I have a fellowship. But the point is that our mobility is a special kind of mobility. So if we want to think mobility, we cannot just start by thinking mobility out there. We have to start thinking mobility from our own organism, our senses. So that is, if you want to redefine mobility, is number one, what does it mean to me, mobility? And once you become aware and kind of respond to your question, you began to sense differently and you began to know differently. I don't have a formula that each of us has to kind of find a way, but for me, that was borderland. Borderland kind of, and then coloniality, because borderland kind of give me the first kind of anchor. This is what I am, like it or not. I am an immigrant here, there, in the borderland. I dwell in the borderland. And when you dwell in the borderland, your emotion are in the borderland, and your thinking are in the borderland. And you begin to see the world differently. So that is the question. It's not just giving a kind of disciplinary description or undisciplinary description of what that is. You start from there. What is for me? And once you kind of, and that is just not an individual, because there is a lot of people like you in London and everywhere today, in Europe and United States. So start kind of talking about that, kind of sharing experience and stories. And that I can say with confidence that what you began to feel, that you began to see things that you couldn't see, where you were still a kind of disciplined subject. So that is what I can say about this redefining. Yeah, because I mean, if we are undisciplinary thinkers, we don't care about redefinition, because redefinition is kind of within modernity. Give me a new one. Give me a new definition, mobile, and then you kind of make your kind of indenture because you have a new definition of it. But you are kind of caught in the system, and the system kind of prize you because you have a new definition. Oh, wow, how nice. So I am aware that you are graduate students and you have to finish your PhD, and you cannot be just kind of unaware of that. So the question, until for the time being, I mean, you are a PhD, while you have to do the PhD and then the early years of teaching, you have to play the game in the borderland. because the power there is that you know something that they don't. You know your own kind of borderland living and knowing, and you know their system. But they only know their system. They don't know you. So that is the game. That is why, I mean, I play so well the darker side of Renaissance that I get an award. and the people who kind of are into this, they realized that that was the darker side of Renaissance. I was not training the Renaissance. I was not training history. I did it out of anger, anger from the borderland, without this kind of feeling and emotion to use my reasoning. So I think that what happened with when I kind of started talking to people and they began to comment, I realized that because of thinking from the borderland, I began to see a lot of things that specialists in the Renaissance were not seeing, and especially in colonial Latin American historiography were not seeing. Because the Renaissance was studying the Renaissance, the Latin American colonial was studying the colonial, nobody was in the border. In the border with the power differential. I knew that the kind of the power was in the, it's not located, but I mean, the Renaissance has a cloud, but not colonial historiography. So I had to play that kind of game. To play it according to the rules, but doing what I wanted to do. And as I said before, I was not training in Renaissance. I was not training in historiography. I was not training in cartography. I was training in semiotics. So that was a big help, because semiotic allows me to kind of organize. And I was at the university, so I knew the kind of the rule of footnotes and bibliography. So I have the tools. I have the tools, so I have to kind of use those tools instead of those tools using me to do my job. So that's another thing I always tell my students and young people who talk to me about this. And I say, well, we cannot abandon the university, the museum, or the kind of the whatever. I mean, whatever institution, the radio, the newspaper, the gallery that you are working on, but be aware that they are using you. And the question is, it's okay because they give you a salary and all this kind of thing. The question is, how can you use them? So that is what I have been doing for the past 30 years, perhaps. Duke used me. I respond to everything that they have to do, my classes, meeting, etc. And I like to teach, so I pay a lot of attention to my students. But Duke allows me to use Duke. I don't tell the dean about that.
Well, this is recorded, and we have to say that.
So keep it. You know, when people, the Maya wrote the Popol Vuh in 1550 in Maya Quiche alphabetic writing. So the manuscript was discovered by a Franciscan, I think, in 1701. So they use alphabetic writing to tell the stories and to keep it within the community. So Rigoberta Menchú always kind of talk about secrets. The secret, she talk about secrets, but she doesn't tell you the secrets. Right? So the question is, and then there's what I mean, Josefina Ludmer, which probably you heard about, is kind of well-known Argentinian critic, and in the 80s, she wrote a very influential article, The Trick of the Weeks. And when you are in a kind of subaltern position, whatever scale, right, from the bottom to kind of a well-being subaltern like us in London or Duke, etc. Yeah, think about the trick of the week. And my tricks are border thinking, border dwelling. Other people have other. I mean, but you have to discover yourself.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Actually, this picks up on a lot of conversation that me and Manu have had regarding like doing PhDs, staying within academic institutions, and the kind of like tension between challenging the rules of the game, but also kind of like knowing that you have to play them. So that actually gives us a lot of insight on letting like not letting the system use you, but like you being the one using the system.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's really
so another great influence back then was Kenny Rogers. You know Kenny Rogers?
I don't. No.
Kenny Rogers is a country song singer. Great. Look, Kenny Rogers is a great American, US, and he has a fantastic song about poker. And there is a line that I kept for me. You have to know when to fold it. What you were saying, Benedetta.
Exactly. Yeah.
You have to know. You can push, but it's, you fold it for a while and think about it. And when you are in that position, it's fun. So that is when you recover your joy. It's not that you won't have bad moments, but in general, if you don't have that, the chances of depression and being totally, constantly beaten in the game may destroy you. And that's what they want. So that is what, recover the joy, not losing, and without losing the anger. And so that's kind of the dance on the borderland.
The dance of the borderlands. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
Right.
Yeah.
You can go to the nightclub now after COVID.
Love it. Yeah, actually, that links a lot to another question I wanted to ask you. Like, the way in which you describe your journey through decoloniality and the way in which you describe your interaction with the game is a mix of doing and feeling. So you said many times, I felt coloniality and I felt coloniality, and your journey is about encounters. So another challenge that the colonial options proposes is probably the one on dismantling the border between thinking and doing. And especially in your last book, you talk a lot about like this border between theory and praxis, and the fact that exactly because we are learning within westernized and dichotomized ways of doing and thinking, we are unable to overcome this. And for example, you rightly correct that we said anti-disciplinary, and I thought that that's actually what we're trying to do. So as both me and Manu, as scholars that are interested in decoloniality, we talk a lot about the concept of unlearning, but sometimes it's so entrenched in our mind that we use words and we're so used to dichotomized thinking that it's so hard to decolonize our mind, as you actually said. So your work has done a lot and have been said a lot about Eurocentric obsession with bordering, not just in terms of like geographical and geopolitical bordering, but also epistemic bordering. So you talk a lot about epistemic disobedience, and you don't only challenge this obsession with bordering, but you propose the decolonial as an option to move from global linear thinking to thinking from the border. So through decoloniality, we do not only question what we know, but how we learn what we know and we problematize it. And as you and Professor Walsh beautifully explain in your book, decoloniality works through the interdependence and continuous flow between theory and praxis, and the idea that doing is thinking and thinking is doing. So I know that's a long introduction, but I just wanted to ask you to expand a bit on that, and what is actually border thinking, and how can decolonial and border thinking speak to the way in which we do, we think, and we feel our researchers?
Well, that's a package of question. But well, let's start from someplace. Perhaps I would start from the concept of option, because many people, and when we were, the manuscript of the book that was sent to evaluators, and one evaluator said, well, why option? Decolonial has to be an imperative. Well, that is a problem. It's a problem because it's an imperative for people who believe in decoloniality, but not for people who don't. If you make it an imperative, well, Christianity is an imperative, Islam is an imperative, liberalism and neoliberalism is an imperative, and Marx is an imperative. But we say, no, they're all options. It's up to you. They are kind of not the truth and the solution for whatever they propose. The Christian, the Marxist, Islam, liberal, neoliberal. They are options that are imperative for the people who believe in carry on the option. And that is one, for me, one of the powerful move of calling that an option. We live among options. Or as we say today, we live among narratives, and the best narrative, I mean, the more convincing narrative wins, right? So that's the first one. We live in a more option, and what are those options? There are three of them, mainly. One is kind of option of belief that we call religion, like mainly the religion of the books, right? Then there are kind of ideological option, not in a kind of pejorative, but in a descriptive way. Ideology as a system of ideas, kind of secular. Religion are kind of theological, and these are secular. And then you have the liberalism, conservative, Marxism, etc., etc. And then there are, for us, all of those are important for us, but the one that touches closer are the disciplinary options. And that is why we kind of say that we are undisciplinary. We are putting another option on the table and kind of relinquishing. We play the game because we're in university, we play the game of kind of scholarship. We kind of bibliography and footnotes and good argument. Good argument are always important in the academy or outside of the academy. If you are a politician, if you are a journalist, whatever, you have to kind of tell, I mean, what is a good argument? It's a good story. It's all kind of storytelling with a different kind of rules. So literature is the more free of the storytelling, but quantum theory is storytelling. It's telling us the story about the world. So then you begin to see the world differently with just one concept. When Quijano introduced coloniality, wow, I began to, I mean, I use a lot the example of the puppeteer. If you are in the audience, you are enchanted with the puppets in such a way that, okay, you pay attention to what is going on. But then you say, okay, next time I come, I will just go entre bambalinas, I go in the back. And then you began to see the puppeteer moving the puppets, and it's no longer enchanting, it's something else, no? So that is the question. I mean, to kind of the link from the discipline. Now, again, you have to write a PhD. You have to do it. I had to write a book. I wrote The Darker Side of Renaissance. The PhD is different because you have to concede whatever the kind of the advisor asks you to do. But if you know what you know and what you want to do, that is kind of easy to negotiate. You don't have to confront. You have to kind of find a way, right? So that for me is the kind of the power of the decolonial option, but the decolonial option could not have, before. So when coloniality was like going back in the back scene and looking at modernity as a puppeteer. So coloniality allow us to see, look how they are moving the strings. So they are always changing the puppets and they are always changing the string, but you know what they are doing. So you have to be attentive. What is the new string? What is the new puppet? What kind of new stories are telling? And that is the rhetoric, what we call the rhetoric of modernity. The rhetoric of modernity are kind of stories that are trying to enchant you. And the promise that sustainable development for 2030 and things like that. So, but again, the option could not have come into the mind without feeling in the borderland. That I was working in the discipline, but I was not trying to make progress in the discipline or make contribution to the discipline. So that's a great thing I learned also indirectly from Quijano. Quijano was not interested in improving sociology. Coloniality was a question of life. It's a question of life for the people, and at that moment we're kind of discussing this, the kind of the imperiality, if you like to talk like that, and kind of the development. They were fighting the image of development. Now, the second point, the theory and praxis. How do you find development? You cannot do a decolonial development. Because if you think about that, you say, it's like socialism. Now I want to do my development. That's another thing. So the way to fight development, well, you can do what a lot of people are doing now. I mean, I know a group in Argentina who created, using technology and the computer, a kind of community of living without money. Still you need money, but you reduce half, because if you have rice, and I'm a carpenter, well, let's give me some rice or other things, and you need to fix the table, I fix the table for you, right? You need a ride to the airport. Okay, I take you to the airport, and then I have something that you need, and I give it to you. So that's how reciprocity is. Reciprocity doesn't work that you give me something, I give you something else. Reciprocity is communal, and everybody kind of helps it. So that's another way to kind of find development. The Zapatistas have kind of stopped development. I mean, not in Mexico, for them. Rojava, the women in Rojava, the gynecology and the kind of taking science in their own hands. So what I mean here is that you don't find development, which is the example here, just by doing something else, to kind of living differently. You need a discourse, right? You need a discourse to conceive how you want to live. I mean, the Zapatistas at the beginning, or the Rojava, but then when you start doing it, you keep on thinking. And that is where the modern concept of theory and praxis collapses. because the modern concept of theory and practice is, well, I do theory from Monday to Friday, and Saturday and Sunday I do praxis. I go to paint wall. I get to kind of join some kind of group that is kind of a fighting. So no, our big praxis is conceptual. This is what is our doing. We need not just to kind of undermine and reduce modern concepts to their own size. They are okay if they are kept into the kind of their territory. But the problem now is that it became global. So the question is, on the one hand, to reduce that to size and to propose different concept, different story, different narrative. Narrative has a tremendous power. Have you seen that kind of Chimamanda Adichie that have already 5-6 million clicks, which is the danger of a single story?
I don't think so.
No, I was gonna.
You
Yeah, I was
sh-
gonna say.
Okay,
I was
you
thinking something
should
else. No.
you should say look at it in relation to what we are talking right now.
Okay.
The danger of a single story is Christianity, liberalism, neoliberalism, Marxism, Islamism, in the grand scale. But there are kind of single stories at the everyday life level. And that's what she's talking about. For some reason, have 5 million click, or now 6 million or something like that. So that is thinking and doing at the same time. It's doing and thinking and thinking and doing. But we have to overcome the idea and say, you are just a thinker. Right? Yeah, you are just a thinker, but all this kind of single narrative has big thinkers behind. You have Aristotle and Machiavelli and Locke and Hobbes. They build the system. So we have to kind of take them. Listen, I think another example to kind of understand the question of doing and theory and praxis is what happened in the United States with the kind of taking the statue down. That's that before in South Africa, and then I don't know with other parts, but I mean that became a praxis to kind of. But you know, when you decide to take roads down, you already have a story. You just you don't go say, well, I don't like this guy, I will just take it down. So I was in South Africa. I was in Cape Town, giving a talk about 2 or 3 months before that about decoloniality. The room was packed, and there were a lot of questions. And then a friend of mine, I didn't pay attention to that. I mean, just a lot of questions. I mean, people were interested in decoloniality. That's fine. I mean, that's happened. But the friend of mine, faculty there, told me after the roads came down, said, Walter, the day you were in Cape Town was already a heated ambience. So something was going on there. So they went to the conference not because they want to know about decoloniality, and especially in South Africa, they know about decoloniality. But they went because they were moving in that kind of direction. So I didn't know that. So when you take the statue down, you have already story. You already, as I said before, you don't kind of take it down because I don't like your face or the marble that they built it, etc. And then when you take it down, the stories kind of proliferate, but already with a different foundation, the statue down. So what happened in the United States, very, very interesting. because in two cases was a black young journalist who celebrated the statue because that allow us to tell story anew. Was not, but again, when they took the statue down, they know what they were doing. They were kind of a story. But now the statue is down, that the praxis allows you to do another praxis, the kind of continue the theory that allows you to take the statue down, right? You see that the kind of, it's not the what is first, the egg or the chicken, the famous question, no? But there is one more thing. And she said that allow us to tell a story anew. Was kind of impact there. And then there was a white guy who said, it was great. I mean, he wrote an op-ed. He said, well, I mean, to take down the founding father, that's okay. That's I think is needed. It's a kind of good kind of political move. But the founder father wrote the Constitution. So if you take the founding father and leave the Constitution untouched, you keep the rule of the game intact. So that's where the theory. It's not just that you tell new stories, you need theory to kind of undermine and reduce to sight the big truth. Make sense? So, and all of that is possible because of modern thinking. When this young periodist journalist said that allow us to tell the story anew, it's because she already linked it from academic historiography or history. She kind of began to realize that now, I mean, it's the moment to tell a different stories for a different people. We cannot just keep of the story that these guys were telling us all the time. So that's the praxis, to kind of enter into not the confrontation, but, and that is re-existing, telling my own stories, and that kind of proliferates. So you don't have to convince people. So it's an option because you put the story there for whomever feel, take it and run. Because if you are a missionary, you want, and you have a mission, you want the converted to follow your example or your dictate. So we say, well, this is what we are doing. This is an option. That satisfies us and a lot of people who are into that. Take it or leave it, and you take it, you run and do whatever you like. You can change it, etc. But the fact is that if that option sparked something, well, you are in your own, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's as far as we can go. We can. A lot of people still think that the decolonial should provide a model for the liberation of the world. No, that is what we are where we are, right? It's different. It's difficult to kind of get into this way of thinking what kind of the world kind of disaster is, and what can we do with all the people we suffer, etc., etc. And so as a kind of human being, we kind of sense that. But another friend of mine, Brazilian in that case, De Souza Santo, but no Boa, an activist, a black activist from the north. He is in agriculture and all kind of great thinker, and also, and he told me 20 years ago, said, Walter, we cannot change the world if people who are in the world don't change. So you cannot go there to change the world because you have a great idea with decolonial, and then acting as a kind of modern subject. So that is another thing. I don't know if there was another point here. Unlearning. Well, yes. That is, but when you get into border thinking, you begin to unlearn because when you look at the puppet here from the back stage, your mind, I mean, it depends your mind, it depends on your mind and your body and your kind of trajectory. So there is no model of border thinking from that. The only thing is that we can say is, if you dwell in the border, put your mind where your foot is, right? In the border, right? So that's a kind of border dwelling. Border dwelling and border thinking cannot be separated. You cannot do border thinking dwelling in the territory, because if you are in the territory, you're in the territory of modernity, of Western civilization, as they want you to be and to do. Well, I don't know if I kind of address your package of questions.
Sorry about that. It's the overexcitement.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, seriously. Thank you very much, Professor Mignolo. That has been great.
Oh yeah,
like,
that's.
Yeah. We would stay like here, like listening to you probably for hours, but like for the sake of the webinar, probably like we should stop. So we thank you so much again, and we look forward to read your new book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to, if you give me one more minute.
Absolutely.
Oh yes, fine.
Because
we have the evening free, so it's fine.
No, I have a class at 3, but I mean, it kind of change the channel. No, but I want to, because in the last question, you think, how can decolonial and border thinking speak? Is your question, but there is one aspect here. How can decolonial and border thinking speak to the way in which we think and do research? That is the book about.
Perfect.
When is it? When is exactly coming out?
It's announced by June, yeah, mid-June, something like that. I am working on the galleys now. It's a fat book. It's 700 pages.
Wow.
But it's about that, the politics of decolonial investigation, right? But it's related to a lot of things that I said, because I mean, your last question was kind of connected to the book. So is everything I said is a reflection of 30 years of thinking and research and telling stories about this. So I kind of took a step back and thought about, and when I thought about, I realized that since the darker side, the research for the darker side of Renaissance, I was always doing decolonial investigation, but I didn't know. Now, in retrospect, I have the concept, and I can go back and kind of reflect in a lot of things I did in the past 20 years, because the material there is the past 20 years. And so, and hope that that will help people to kind of rethink, and I mean, to redo, to kind of to reorient ourselves in the way we do research. But basically, and we cut this, basically is this. The first question is, think about how coloniality is touching you. Where is touching you? Where do you sense coloniality? A lot of people don't sense it because they sense modernity. But whoever senses coloniality, well, we are all different. from, I mean, as human being or kind of different parts of the world, sexual preference, color of skin, religion, etc. It touches us. Those who are touched by coloniality touch us in a different way. And if you are if you are kind of interested in this, is because already coloniality touched you. The question is where, right? Then once you kind of kind of have an idea of that, how to answer the question. So a lot of students doing the PhD come and say, well, I have this project, and explain. And I don't ask about method. A lot of other professors talk about method. We talk about what. And then at the end, I said, why do you want to do that? Beyond the fact that you have to do a dissertation. Which means, why are you doing what you are doing? And you can do a dissertation just to have a dissertation and to get a job, and nothing wrong with that. But that's the kind of playing to the game of modernity. And it's fine. You don't want to get into the problem of coloniality. But if you are into the question of coloniality, the question is, why are we doing what I am doing, knowing that I am embedded in the colonial matrix of power? Because coloniality touches us, because we are all, it's like the movie The Matrix, we're all in the Matrix. There are people who don't think they are in the Matrix, and they think that they are the observer outside of the Matrix. That's from modernity. Yeah? But from those of us who know that we are in the Matrix, everybody is in the Matrix. So that's related to the option again, right? So once you are in the Matrix, well, you have a disciplinary option, and they defend it, and they get fellowship. I mean, the faculty and all that. But I don't believe in that. So why I want to apply for fellowship? I know that I won't get it, but also I don't believe it. So that's a question when you reorient your research. Why are we doing what we are doing? When I wrote The Darker Side of Renaissance, I didn't have a rationale that I am telling you now. But when my friend says you are writing now with anger, then I knew. Then I knew that I was not writing the book to improve the Renaissance, to tell the Renaissance people, say, hey, you have to include colonialism. Why? Right. So I was using the Renaissance to say, look how bastard, you kind of silence all that with kind of your European kind of monument and white Greek columns that you painted in the 18th century, things like that. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This has been like so refreshing in so many ways. And yeah, we're very thankful, and we look forward for this.
I save all of this. I have 2 on Saturday, but that really helped me to think and to write. So it's a kind of
reciprocity.
Because you know a lot of I know a lot of things you don't, but you know a lot of things I don't. So your question kind of guides me in what I don't know. Your experience, for example, that lead you to ask this kind of question or the other question. So that is the exchange. I mean, I have in Saturday a very interesting. It's a group that already published a special issue on decolonizing fashion in Europe. But this, because a lot of people are saying decolonizing, and just in case. But these people, but these people know what they are talking about. They did the homework. They sent me articles. So that will be, and you did a good work in a kind of reading. And so that will be a good conversation because it will be with people who are already seriously into the question of decolonial. They're kind of decolonizing research, they're kind of decolonizing fashion. So
Dialogue.
Yeah.
it's a conversation, exactly.
Yeah.
And conversation is education, it's not transmission of information.
I think that's a really good way of closing it, Professor Mignolo. Thank you so much. No, it's a really good way of closing the conversation, this last sentence.
Well, right, okay. I talk too much, but I mean, you ask questions. Okay, bye-bye. Great talking
Thank you so much,
to you.
Professor.
Say hello to Engin.
We will for sure.
Bye.
Bye.